All right, we got 10 o'clock whistle. Time for class to start. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Today is the Essential Evergreens class, AKA Colorful Coniferous Creatures. You have to say that 3 times fast before we get going. So thanks for coming in. Hopefully everybody's staying safe and well here. This is one of the more fun classes for me to teach. One of my first plantophile addictions was conifers, like many gardeners. If I step to the side here, you probably saw all the things we brought in. Lots of cool textures, lots of colors, lots of growth habits. There's certainly a conifer for just about every spot in the garden. You know, try to utilize these little evergreen beauties to shine in the winter. I mean, we use perennials, lots of plants this time of year drop in color. Deciduous plants, perennials go dormant. And what do we have left in our garden but conifers for structure, for texture, for color, different forms? There's certainly something for everybody out there, whether you're sun or shade, you like yellows, you like blues, you like different shades of green. There's a little bit of everything available in the conifer world for sure. I wanted to start by talking about growth rates, just give you some basic information. You know, really be careful on growth rates. Look at your tags as you purchase things. One of my favorite growers is Isley Nursery that I've used for 30 years, and we get a lot of cool plants from them. But if I look at their tag and I look at the back there and I read that information, it is going to tell me how fast it grows and give me a garden size, not a 10-year height, not a 2-year height, but really pay attention to growth habits. This particular little guy is called Mr. Bowling Ball, little round, thuya is kind of fun. Grows 3 to 6 inches a year, and this would reach 6 feet by 6 feet, you know, essentially forever. You know, we'll talk about pruning and things that we can keep controlled, but, you know, that is what you have to start with. And I think probably more so than any other plants that I do classes on here, the word dwarf, you know, pops into your brain, and you think of dwarf, and what is your mind picture? This little tiny 2 foot by 2 foot plant that you can tuck in your garden and never see it grow much. Dwarf is a really relative term, so be careful when you see a plant labeled as dwarf this or dwarf that. I think a lot of times with conifers, if you're needing something dwarf, you're really wanting something miniature. We have a lot of little cute plants here that grow just an inch or two a year. This is a little guy called Butterball, little golden hinoki cypress. But, you know, I could have this for 20 years in my garden, and I would have a little plant that's maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall, and maybe 2.5, 3 feet wide. You know, that is a dwarf. If I look at other types of hinoki as an example, and look at dwarf golden hinoki, you know, long term, I would have something up 6 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. So really pay attention to the tags and the growth rates and the ultimate size in the garden, because that matters everything, okay? If we look at the colors behind me, different things for structure and presence, you know, there's a lot of conifers that we can have that would stay, you know, low, mound shaped, globe shaped, spreading, upright and narrow, and maybe even something like weeping. I wanted to show maybe a weeping style conifer. If I pick this up, he's not too super big yet, but this is a great example of a weeping type conifer. This is a weeping Norway spruce. A lot of people may have these in their yards. You certainly see them around, but sometimes weeping gives you all the flexibility in the world. So you can see this is staked. This has got a tall stake on it. If I continue to train this leader up, I could train it up as tall as I want and then let it fall down. So I would end up with perhaps a taller, narrower specimen that will give me the form and the texture I'm looking for. If I take this home and I grab my pruners and I just take this leader out, now I've got something that's going to weep and spread prostrate, you know, eat up some ground space, trail in between rocks. I can do it either way. There's a lot of really cool weeping plants in the conifer world that you can ultimately choose, you know, kind of how you want to have them grow in your landscape long term. If we look at winter color, you know, we got frost a couple nights ago at my place in Everett, and we're supposed to be down, you know, high 20s here on Sunday and Monday. Things are going to start to turn color. A lot of different conifer plants will take on purples or a different red color in the winter, a lot of yellows. If we look at, maybe something like the golden bugle pine here. If I had this in my landscape all summer long, this was just green. But now that we start to get some cold nights, this turns a beautiful bright yellow for the entire winter. Then we go back to green in springtime. So if you like different color change, but not lose the needles, there's certainly some great conifers that we can utilize for winter color. The other big one with that would be cryptomerias. So if I look at different Japanese cedars, they've got great texture. You can see that one's kind of real ropey foliage. This is Little Champion. It's kind of a nice semi-dwarf one. This might get, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, 4 or 5 feet wide. It can be pruned, but this would take on some bronzing in the winter time. So yes, it's green all year. It doesn't lose its needles, but in the wintertime, I've got a little added interest with some winter color. So consider that. Placement and planting, my first question would always be, do you have sun? Do you have shade? And we would pick the appropriate plant. There's certainly some conifers that would enjoy a little bit more morning sun or can take some shade, and a lot of them that would obviously like to have full sun as well. The biggest thing is going to be drainage. There's going to be very few that we can handle real wet winters, heavy clay soils, poor drainage areas. We want to be a little bit more careful which ones we choose so we have long-term success. Most all of the conifers are going to like to be a little bit on the high and dry side, especially a lot of the dwarfs. So watch your drainage. I wanted to mention, if you came down to shopping here at Sunnyside, you would essentially see conifers grown in 2 different ways. If I borrow Mr. Bowling Ball here again, and I carefully pull this out of the pot, well, maybe. So if I pull him out of the pot, let's say I took him home and I'm going to plant this in my landscape. If you can look at the root ball, conifers usually have a pretty extensive root system. It's not the end of the world. I hear a lot of gardeners say, if I'm root bound, I don't want to buy it. With a conifer, I'd rather have something, frankly, that's got a more developed root system. But before I plop this in my ground, I'm going to take the tip of my pruners or hori knife, and I'm going to score the outside of this, loosen up those roots and the bottom as well, so that he takes off into my soil, and off we go, growing successfully in the garden. The other way, you'll tend to find things what we would call field grown or balled and burlap. So a lot of the bigger plants that we might purchase, maybe we're like me, a little impatient, and I want a larger plant right away. We're going to have something a little bit more established to take home a plant in our garden, 5 foot, 6 foot, 7. Sometimes we'll get even some 8-foot stuff around here. That is typically going to be in a big, large burlap bag and then planted into a pot, perhaps. So one thing I would caution you, never, ever take the burlap off. That's the number one reason I see a lot of larger plants crash. When we plant a balled and burlap specimen, we want to dig a nice hole, just like we would for container, add some compost, get some good organic starter fertilizer in there. I'm going to plant that as is, start to backfill and get my hole stabilized. And the last thing I'm going to do is just cut the twine away from the trunk and either peel that burlap off to the sides, or for me, a lot of times I'll grab my pruners and just chop that top little excess off that I unfolded and get rid of it. Now I can bring my soil in, pack it down firmly, add some mulch, and I'm good to go. If you take the burlap sack off and then plop it in the hole, typically that root ball is going to crack. And I hate to tell you, you're probably going to lose your big conifer, because usually conifers are kind of a funny creature. You would plant it, say, today, it would look great all winter if you crack the root ball, and then about 6 months from now, you go, God, what's going on with that? It's turning yellow, it's turning brown, and then we end up losing the plant. So it's a little bit longer transplant shock with the conifer, but as long as we don't crack that root ball and be a little careful and a little gentle with burlap, we're able to take home big arborvitae, big hinoki cypress, and a lot of larger plants that we can maybe get a little better price on for something more substantial to start with, okay? If we talk fertilizing real quick, if you've got healthy soil, you've probably got healthy conifers. Here in Western Washington, we've got acidic soil, which they love. As long as we have to, be careful in the drainage again, we're going to have happy plants long term. If I'm going to feed, I want to use either one of two things. I typically send people home. Almost everybody buys rhododendron food. You know, this is for all acid-loving plants. I could easily use this. My other choice is just buy some tree shrub food. This is good for just about anything, and it's got a little bit more nitrogen in it because that's really all we need for good color and nice growth is a good amount of nitrogen. Those are both nice organic fertilizers from the EV Stone company that we carry. And something if I went out and fed my plants maybe 1st of March each year, that's probably plenty. If I really want to give them an extra dose, maybe they struggled the year before, maybe I feed it once again like 1st of June and early summer, and that would be it. We don't want to feed late summer, fall, winter. We just want to do it those 2 times a year at the most, and you would have happy plants in the ground. Okay. I'll just mention pruning real quick. I'll be teaching pruning class here in a couple weeks, and we certainly will touch on some conifers, but this is not the time of year we want to do a lot of cutting back of things. So if you think about it for next spring, essentially, or maybe you're like us and you do a little Christmas wreath and you do a little tip pruning, that's okay. But I'm not going to cut a conifer back substantially during this time of year. So if I want to prune, it's usually coming out of winter in that April, May to June time frame, so that I have enough summer for that to regrow, harden off the growth, and I've got a happy plant for the next winter again. Okay. So in all the world, there's really only 2 kinds of conifers when it comes down to pruning. Real quick, we would have something like arborvitae, junipers, yews, lots of things that we would call random branch conifers. So this is maybe liken it like a boxwood. I've got stems with so many buds up and down, I can grab my head shears and I can round this off. I don't have to sit for an hour with my hand pruners and cut every little branch off. I can round that off and prune a little quicker and have a thicker, bushier plant long term. A lot of you have arborvitae hedges. That's what we do with those. I've seen my neighbors with the chainsaw and the stick, you know, whacking them off and shearing them back. I'll have a thicker hedge plant or a little more compact conifer if I can shear it like that. The other half is what we call whorl conifers, W-H-O-R-L. That's more Christmas tree. You know, think of Christmas time when we bring our noble fir in. We have a big central trunk and we have rings of branches as that grows up, you know, your noble fir. If we have trees like that, we have to be a lot more careful. You know, that to me is the perfect example of wrong plant in the wrong spot. Maybe you bought a house and you had a noble fir 2 feet off the front foundation, or you've got a larger grower that's impeding the sidewalk. I can't just cut back a plant like that way into the wood and expect it to grow. It will never grow again. So if I have a plant like fir or pine or spruce or larger evergreens, this is a Korean fir called Silver Star. It's got some beautiful needles on it, almost looks like a flock Christmas tree. But you can see that what I'm talking about. I've got long central trunk and I've got these rings of branches. If I follow the growth, I can see what came out this year, last year, and I can follow it into the tree. As it gets older, I can prune out here. I can hit my 2nd year growth, but I can't go back in to the center and cut that branch off. I'm never going to have the tree, the shape. I'm going to lose that limb. So the answer to pruning is pick your conifer wisely. If you need, you know, I need some more room for something like this to grow so I don't have to prune it as much. Or maybe the random branch type plants that I mentioned earlier, I can keep a little bit more contained and more like shrubs or small trees in my yard. Okay. So quick thing on pruning. I just wanted to mention, you know, we won't get into a whole lot of insects and diseases. You know, if you've got good drainage and a healthy yard with good air circulation, I doubt you're going to fight much up here. Sometimes a little bit of bugs get in. You can certainly bring us a sample or email a picture. We can give you a hand with diagnosis. I just wanted to mention what I've always called flagging. This is the time of year in our evergreen state here in Washington that if we look up in the native areas or our yards, we see a lot of brown down the centers of the trunks, maybe even out the branches a little bit, but it's in the center. It's never out on the tips. If I have brown tip growth, I've got an issue. You know, I've got problem with drainage, a bug, or disease perhaps. If I've got brown in the middle, that's a natural process called flagging. We are very dry summers, and as we get into the fall, the cedars, the pines, all these types of trees are going to shed their 3-year-old needles. So everyone thinks of, conifer as evergreen, but really I'm going to hold my foliage for 3 seasons, drop that old growth coming out of summer into winter, and then start over again after that. Is it cutting out? No. Okay. Somebody hacking a little bit?
No, we're just going to change it.
Oh, there we go. All right. So I wanted to show this pine as an example. Now, if I look at this, this is a eastern white pine called blue shag. Great little dwarf bushy pine. Again, be careful with dwarf. If I don't prune this, this is going to get up there probably 5 or 6 feet tall, 5 or 6 feet wide, but it's never going to be a huge tree. I've got beautiful silver blue color. But if I look at that, what do I have in the center? Now, you can see old brown needles. There's nothing wrong with this plant. We just got these in a couple weeks ago for winter. This is all the old growth dropping. So if you're OCD gardener like me, I'm probably strapping my gloves on, and I tend to pull a little bit of that brown growth out of the base of my plants, especially when they're young. They look a little nicer that way, and I, again, make sure air gets in there and I don't have any issues. But, the bigger they get, you're going to see that drop turn into mulch at the base. It's just a totally natural process we don't have to worry about, okay? So remember, flagging is not the plague. It's just something we're always going to see really all over the country as we get from that summer season heading into the cooler winter season, okay? I wanted to mention a couple websites perhaps. I'm going to try to show you a few plants here today, but there is a bazillion choices out there. And if you're a conifer enthusiast or looking at possibilities of things that you might be able to try for your own home landscape, look around. Our website, sunnysidenursery.net's got great pictures and information of a lot of the things that we carry. I've sent a lot of our customers to the isleynursery.com. If you type in your search engine, just type in Isley, I-S-E-L-I. That's a great nursery in a little town called Boring, Oregon, right by Mount Hood, and they've got great information. I think that's the best conifer website to see pictures and look at mature specimens and not just a little, oh, here's a little tiny plant. What does this do in 20 years? You can really see how things have established down there. And I would always check out the American Conifer Society. That's a great website that you'll find a lot of very rare and unusual things, as well as a lot of the staples that we use in our gardens up here all the time as well, okay? So I'm going to show you a few samples here. If you have our handout, I'm hoping everybody got it, just so you've got something to reference back to. This has got some of the tips I talked about. And I'm not going to make you learn Latin, but there's really no way for me to organize conifers except by genus. You don't have to memorize this or anything. But if I just put fir down as an example, that covers so many different plants and totally different growing plants, to be honest with you. So by putting Abies down, that designates true fir. There's your noble fir. Abies procera is our noble fir, our Christmas tree. If I think of Doug fir, which is native around here, that's really not a fir. It's a false hemlock, and it's in its own genus on the second page called Pseudotsuga. So again, you don't have to spell them, you don't have to memorize them, but it's an easy way for me to organize and maybe show you a little bit of examples of all, okay? So if I look at that first one, Abies there, again, I'll show you a couple real quick. We looked at Silver Star, is one that we looked at as we looked at a world type conifer. I've got curled silver needles. I've got almost a flock Christmas tree look. That's a beautiful specimen tree with kind of a steel blue to purple cone on it, which is very cool when that comes out in the summer. Yes, that's a bigger tree. Again, I'm telling you to look at your tags. If I read that, it's going to tell me broad upright, 10 inches a year, grows about 12 feet tall, 8 feet wide. You can see pictures of an old one of those on the Isley website or ours. But that gives you an idea. As an example in fir, let's say I love that color. I like the silver, the silvery blue, the curled needle, but I don't have room for a 12-foot tree. That's when we look at these different cultivars. So if I like a dwarf plant like that, I look for a Korean fir called Icebreaker. That's a great one. You'll see pictures on our website as well. We sell a lot of them that stays very small, same color, nice and tight growth habit, but I might end up with a plant that's only, say, 2.5 feet tall, 3 feet wide 20 years later. Just a totally different creature. So a lot of these things I'm showing you, the lesson is I've got other options as far as growth habits or different cultivars. So Korean fir is one. One of my favorites in the winter is Nordman fir. This is a Nordman fir called Golden Spreader. You can see that limey yellow color. This even gets a little orangey as we get cold. Nordman fir is a native tree that would be 80 feet tall. This is a cultivar of it that's got the color, and I'm never going to get really a leader on this. So I'm going to have maybe a chest high, rounded out bush form with the great color on it. So Nordman fir might be another example of that. Cedrus I put on there, those are your true cedars. So some people have, you know, Atlas cedar, Lebanese cedar. If you were on, say, the Isley website and just click the cedar tab, the Cedrus tab, you're going to punch up a bunch of different cedars. It's not Alaskan cedar. Again, the common names sometimes get a little confusing, but true cedars. So you can find some options for those around. Cephalotaxis is a pretty cool plant from Japan. This is what we would call Japanese plum yew. So if I can see that, this is the fastigiate form that frankly would look like a big narrow cigar as that grew. The needles are very large and thick. If you kind of look at the texture of that, this has almost got a little bit of a tropical appearance to me. And yews always get a small fruit on them, our English and ones I'll show you a little later. The Japanese plum yew would be much larger. So if you want to walk out in the winter, almost looks like little reddish purple Christmas lights sitting on them here as they get older and start to fruit. That's a pretty cool plant. I can grow in part shade, shade. A great one for pots too, if you like a little kind of narrow focal point. Something I can manage, and again, I can prune this being a random branch conifer. The next one there's Chamaecyparis, or what we call false cypress. Lots of options. Frankly, I kind of chuckle because that's one of my favorites, and I could have brought probably 40 varieties in here to show you. But just a couple kind of as an option, you know, to show you the range. You know, this is a little miniature green one called Just Dandy. Some people have Nana, same idea. You know, I would call this moss on a rock. You know, as a reference in my yard, I have this exact cultivar I got years ago before it was even named from Isley as kind of a one to try. I've never touched it with pruners, and in 20 years, my plant is about 18 inches tall and about 30 inches across. It's a very small little miniature type Hinoki cypress. We saw Butterball, you know, kind of same idea with the yellow going. That's another miniature one if I like a little touch of yellow on it. That's a pretty cool variety as well. If I go up a little bit, you know, this is where that word dwarf comes in. This is dwarf golden Hinoki cypress, or Nana lutea. It's another variety, but this has got great texture, great color, almost corally on the needles. But this is, you know, again, dwarf is relative. This would end up getting probably, you know, up on me. I'm 6'3", just about up as tall as me and maybe 4 feet wide. You know, is that dwarf to you? Maybe not. We want to get something like Butterball. But again, compared to regular Hinoki cypress, it is dwarf. This is still a manageable size for most gardens. If I look back here, let me just grab it. Now we go to our full size. So this is a new variety called Goldilocks. That's got great color. I hope it's not washed out. Beautiful, bright, sunny yellow with a little green backdrop. You know, this would be a full-size tree. So now we're back to looking at our growth habit much faster and more upright broad. So yes, I can shear Hinoki if I want to keep it a little bit narrower, but I'm probably never going to top it, and I don't want to maybe get him in a spot where I have to prune all the time. Give this little guy some room to grow, and he'd be a beautiful background conifer for the garden. If we wanted to go, ooh, sorry about that, Mr. U. If we wanted to go more on the whites, you can see this is Mauricii. This is an old-fashioned Hinoki. Maybe I like more of that creamy white texture on green. This is one, again, I could shear that would never get super huge. I would expect this to be maybe 6 feet tall long-term and kind of a nice little teardrop or dome shape to it, but certainly a really cool color and something a little bit different if you like the whites, okay? So there's a few Chamaecyparis. The next one on there was Cryptomeria. And again, the Cryptomeria to me are all about texture. This is what we call Japanese cedar. And if I look at the needles of that, it's almost a ropey texture. Very, very cool, I think, in the yard. They're great to grow around the Pacific Northwest. This is perfect climate for them. And again, some people like me, perhaps like some winter color. Others just want different shades of green. So choose your kind of Cryptomeria wisely. You can get some that will always stay green, even darker green in the winter. If you don't want the plum, the purples or bronzing, a little different color, there's certainly green options for all of them as well. Suppressosicyparis, I didn't bring one in. That's our Leland cypress. So that's kind of a hybrid tree between cypress and false cypress. That's a big plant. You know, most people that want Leland cypress are looking for a massive hedge, you know, windbreak. Yes, they can be pruned, but I've seen Leland cypress up around our area up here, excuse me, in the 30 to 40 foot tall range. So if you've got room and property, it's a great screen. Probably not my first choice. I would try to talk you out of it for a typical city yard. It would take over the whole place unless you pruned it. Suppressus is our true cypress. So I brought one example in here. A lot of people have the little Wilmas in their containers. That's a true cypress, one of the Monterey's. This is a hardier Monterey called Donner Gold. I have the two of these in my own garden. So this would be an upright lime yellow. If I rub it and smell it, this is one of those scratch and sniff plants. That smells like beautiful lemon, almost like lemon pledge if you like that smell. These can be sheared very easily. I've had mine over 20 years, and once a spring, I walk out and clip it back into my cone, and I keep them right at my gutter line, about 8 feet tall. They're either side of my patio. If I let this go and you have room, it would be a much larger plant, but it's certainly prunable. So if you like that color, the smell, it's a great yellowy lime color to kind of mix in with a lot of the darker tones that we typically have in our native areas in Washington. So that's Suppressus. Ginkgo is always a fun story, and you probably thought, if you saw back here, pull him out. You know, what's that crazy guy bringing in a leafy plant to the conifer class? All conifers have needles. Well, yes, you are correct. Most conifers do have needles, except for Mr. Ginkgo. So this is a deciduous conifer that would turn gold here as we get into fall color, and this actually does produce a cone. Ginkgo is a prehistoric creature, goes back about 300 million years. This is the original conifer. Everything else that exists after this, pine and spruce and hemlock and on, it all came from this in evolution back in the day. So ginkgo is kind of the bridge between our deciduous broadleaf trees into the conifer realm. Ginkgo is a really cool plant. There's a lot of fun cultivars to grow. No offense to the she's in the crowd, but we all sell male ginkgos. If we have female ginkgo, when they fruit out and get ready to cone, they do not smell very well. And if you've had a female ginkgo, you probably know what I mean. So at a nursery like Sunnyside, we would have all named dwarf, a lot of dwarf clones or narrow upright varieties, but they would all be male. So we wouldn't have to worry about the smell when we get to the fruiting season. So ginkgo is fun. Juniper. Juniper is one of those plants. I say juniper and probably everyone's like, juniper. I had those in my yard in 1975. I don't need those anymore. Juniper has a use, and I'll be honest, they're making a comeback. The problem with juniper is everybody had juniper tam, Pfister junipers, all the stuff that got bushy and tall, 3-4 feet. You had to prune it. It's a great space eater. But we had all that brown underneath. I hate to say, probably some rat's nest underneath there, usually when I see old juniper. It doesn't have to be that. I haven't sold tam juniper for over 20 years. We try to find interesting, cool ones, and there are some great junipers. If I want dry and I have heat, I have slopes, I don't want to water very much, you'd be tough to beat juniper out in some areas. If we have good drainage, and I want something indestructible, we can get a low, flat ground cover juniper or something upright and anything in between. There's some great choices. Just a couple of ones I would show you that I really like. This is a shore juniper called All Gold. If I look at the color of that, if it's not too bleached out, we actually got sun in the greenhouse today. This is lime green to yellow all season long. And if I plant this out in sun or even part shade, this is going to be a flat ground cover, just 4 to 6 inches tall, and it will eat up some space in some area, but I won't have to really water it much. You know, maybe you check it once a month, you know, in the summer, but after that, it's on its own. You know, this is a plant we can walk away from down the road. If I maybe grab one more here. And find something like Communis juniper. This is Compressa, or some people call these pencil point junipers. You know, this has got the silvery blue with the green. It's just a sentinel, straight up, straight and straight down. No branching. It's always going to be nice and stiff and upright. Great for sun, great in pots if you got a hot container. But again, something I could plant out in a hot, dry area and not have to worry about watering it long term. That's one that would fend for itself down the road. Okay. So a couple junipers. I'll mention the larch real quick. A lot of people, we would have them again here little later in the fall, usually mid-November, late November. We'll start to get some of the bigger field stuff in. Weeping larch would be an option. If we look at some of the dwarfer ones, this is one that came out of the German, the Horstmann Arboretum in Germany. This is one that's got a funny name. It's called Volterdingen. It's a fun one to say. But this is a plant, again, you can recognize the needles on there, but as we get colder here, this is going to turn bright gold, drop all of its foliage in the winter, and then bud back out in the spring. So I can pick some different growth habits with larch, but I'm telling you, the gold color is outstanding in the fall. I don't mind having the cool bare wood in the winter, and there's probably nothing prettier than a larch breaking bud come springtime. It's got real soft, kind of pea green needles. Really cool when they break bud and start to wake back up for the next season in the garden. Metasequoia is another kind of old school conifer, big ones usually. If I bring the one I brought in here, he's pretty tall. And if you can kind of see the texture of this, I see more and more of these around. This is a golden variety of Metasequoia called Ogon. These get really cool bark as they get older. That's a big tree. You know, I'm not going to lie to you. Metasequoia is a plant we want to have some room to grow. You know, I'm going to end up with a 30, 40-foot specimen long term to give that guy some room to develop. These will turn kind of an orangey color, maybe late November, and the needles will sit there and stick on the tree a little bit into winter. And then one of those windstorms in January, they'll all drop. And then we leaf back out come springtime, and we get the fresh foliage again once more. Microbiota, I didn't bring one in, but that's some people call it Russian juniper, Russian cypress. You know, I would put that at the top of the indestructible list. That's another plant that looks a little like juniper, kind of sprawls on the ground. It's a little different plant, but you can grow that. It grows in Siberia native, so you can guess like 40 below zero. Don't have to worry about watering. It takes shade. It takes sun. You can grow it just about anywhere. If you just want something simple, that's sometimes a great choice for a lot of home gardeners, just for a nice green space filler. The one thing with microbiota is it would turn, you know, we don't call it brown, we call it chocolate. So it doesn't look gross in the winter. I think it's a really pretty color, but as we get cold, it gets that milk chocolate kind of frosting over the green and is a really cool color over the winter. Then right back to bright green come springtime next year. I put Picea on there, the spruces, lots of cool spruce options. You know, we've got big ones, small ones, little guys, weeping ones, ground cover ones. You could come take a look at some of the spruce. You know, sometimes to get the powder blue, you know, for our landscape, you know, that's spruce. You know, I want that powder blue color. And again, as long as I've got good drainage and good sun, I've got a really low maintenance plant. This is a particular one called Procumbens. So if you find this one, this is one that would grow prostrate. It never gets a leader and turns into a tree. This would flow in between rocks and eat up some ground, but never get very tall. It would get wide. So if you like the blue color and you got a little hot rockery spot or something fun to kind of let it grow out of, you know, spruce a procumbens may be a good option for you. If we go, I'm going to get some more of these. This is the last one because this is popular. But if you look at this little guy, can you see the little miniature cones on the tips of all the branches? So this is a really cool little miniature Norway spruce that we call Push, P-U-S-C-H, Push. So this is a little guy. In spring, the new needles come out red, which is very cool in the yard. And then I get the little tip cones on those that add some interest over the summer, fall, and all the way through the winter here as we get colder. This is always green with the red new growth, but this is the smallest Norway I've seen for most home gardeners. This is a little creature here we probably would never prune that might get maybe 3 feet tall and just a little bit wider. It looks like a big round bush. It's not going to look like a tree at all. So if you want something nice and small, again, for a hot spot, I got good drainage. The Push is a really cool little kind of miniature version of spruce. And then again, we started at the beginning. I showed you the Norway, the weeping spruce that we could train and grow into different shapes that we'd like as well. The one thing I would mention before we get out of spruce is the color blue. And I see a lot of nurseries, a lot of places online that will sell varieties of spruce. And, you know, you can buy a cheap, you know, a cheap Colorado blue spruce just about anywhere. And when you get it and plant it, you might be a little disappointed because if it's not a cloned or grafted variety, it's probably not the color blue that you want. It's going to be greeny with a little bit of blue new growth, and it's not that powder blue color. You know, you'll pay for what you get with conifers. And for us, you know, we carry some pretty cool varieties of blue spruce like Avatar, Sester's Dwarf, some really fun ones that I would have a beautiful Christmas tree shape. But A, I've got the superior blue color, and B, I'm not going to get as big. So if you want something tidy for the yard, yes, you will pay a little bit more for a really cool name variety, but you're not going to have the work down the road, and you will have that color that you love if you like that beautiful powder blue spruce tone. Pinus is the pines. That's got a huge variety of options for pine. If you know pines, I'll show you a couple. But we would have our little standard Mugo pine. I think everybody probably seen so I've heard most people call them Mr. Magoo pines, but they're Mugo pines. This is a great, hardy, easy to grow pine. If I've got sun and I don't want a lot of water and maintenance, it's a great filler plant for green. I wanted to show this because, again, you pay for what you get. I've seen dwarf Mugo pines that get taller than me. If I really want a dwarf Mugo pine, I want to buy a good name selection. Like this is one called Slow Mound. Great variety from Isley that just doesn't get very big. My candles, you can see sitting here on the tips of the branches, all those little candles. I would wait till next spring, and this is when we prune. These candles would pop up about 2-3 inches, and if I wanted to keep it even smaller, I can shear those in half or round it off, and I'll really cut my growth rate down. If I never pruned, it would still probably only grow 3 or 4 inches a year, but I could keep it even smaller by doing a little candle tipping on a lot of the pines. So that's Mugo. We saw the eastern white pine, the Pinus strobus, if I like a little silver blue color on a bush form. That's a fun one. I'll grab one more here. If I look at this cute little guy, he's got texture, he's got form, almost a little bit of a bonsai appearance. This is Pinus parviflora, or what we would call Japanese white pine. I've got a couple different varieties of these in my own landscape, and they're spectacular. Yellows and blues, you can pick different colors and growth habits, but you've got to be careful with drainage. This is probably the #1 thing I'm showing today that I really have to keep high and dry. I keep mine on a south-facing slope, and I never touch it anymore, and he's fine on his own, but I cannot have heavy clay or water with an irrigation system. You will brown out a lot of pines, but especially the Japanese white pines. So there's a few pines for you. Podocarpus I brought one here. So this is kind of a fun little plant. So people call it mountain yew, plum yew, mountain pine. This one's got a zillion different common names, but podocarpus is a great little alpine type yew, a little different species than regular yew. This is one called blue gem. I've got kind of a bluish color to it, and I get a little color on the new growth. We get one called red tip in that's got a really nice red tip needle to it as they grow in the spring. But podocarpus is at the top of the list for drought tolerance. You know, if I'm doing a little kind of alpine rock garden, or I like a cool little conifer, maybe it's a little different, that's manageable, that I can prune. Podocarpus is a great choice to kind of add as a nice foundation plant out in some of those sunny gardens where I just want something kind of lower and bushier that won't get up any kind of tree size to it as well. Pseudotsuga, I mentioned earlier, I didn't bring in Douglas fir. Any of us from Washington, I hope you know what Douglas fir is. Those are big plants. You know, we don't typically sell them here. It's a great native tree. You know, that's your timber, you know, for the Northwest. So Douglas fir is its own little species. You see on there Pseudotsuga, which really means false hemlock. It's not a fir at all. We just kind of always call it Douglas fir over the centuries. Cyadopetus is Japanese umbrella pine. I will have some more of those here pretty quick. We're really low right now, so I didn't bring one in. If you've looked that plant up, that's a really cool, different conifer. Again, a little bit tropical looking. It does, you know, the species will get into a big tree. You know, that's a 25, 30-foot tree down the road. We tend to carry a lot of cultivars of Cyadopetus. So plants like Green Star, you know, that might get just a little bigger than me and have a really nice, thick Christmas shape to it. There's some great cultivars that have come out in the last decade of Cyadopetus that I think are much more appropriate for most smaller gardens. And it's a really cool conifer if you like something different. They're dark green, there's no color on them, but it's a really interesting texture and a little different plant. I'd suggest typing in that Cyadopetus. You can look at some different photographs of those online. That's a fun little conifer. Sequoia dendron is our giant sequoia. So probably the biggest thing, one of the biggest things on earth for conifer, except for coastal redwood, which we have a tough time growing up here. The giant sequoias are massive. I see a lot of big ones around Everett Parks and Marysville homeowners' yards. That's a sweet tree if you've got room to grow. We'd have the big, thick trunks and that nice foliage on them. If you look in the middle here in the back, I'll grab it down. You know, this is giant sequoia. So if I look real close, you can see that sequoia texture. This one's got a really nice kind of powder blue color to it. It's a variety called Hazel. It's a variety called Hazel Smith. So green, blues, you can kind of pick your color tone. But giant sequoia is a plant, you know, when you talked about pruning earlier, I'm not going to plant that right by my front door. I'm going to plant it out in my yard where it's got some room to mature and grow. I'm not going to top it. I don't want to shear that. I want to make that into the giant specimen tree that it was meant to be. Taxodium is kind of like the metasequoia that we talked about earlier. That's our swamp cypress. So again, a plant, if I have wet, that's a great choice. I've had a lot of people I've helped over the years that had, you know, creek beds or kind of wet slopes in areas they wanted some conifer, some larger presence that can handle some wet. That would be a good choice for that as well. That's another deciduous conifer. So I want to make sure you know when I plant that, this time of year, we're turning that rusty orangey yellow. The needles stick on that tree. And then again, we have windstorm January, early February, all those old needles would blow out and we would start over again with fresh spring growth. It's a really cool tree if you've got room to let it grow. The trunk will kind of twist as it grows. So it's really cool bark. And it's a fun tree if you've got some room for it to develop into a nice specimen. Taxus is our yews. You know, why eat yews? Yews is one of the more popular conifers at our place. Very versatile plants to use. I can pick something low, medium. I can go tall, narrow, like Irish yew. They take pruning very well. I use a lot of yews in my own garden, and I use a lot of them in pots as well. If I show you a couple, We have like Irish yew. You can see that's growing straight up like a little telephone pole. We can get gold ones like golden Irish yew. We can get dark green if yellow's not your thing. I've had these in big urns and as centerpieces on my patio for a decade plus with flowers around them and different other plants. But it's a great little presence that I always have something nice and green with the texture. And again, the little red berries on there over the winter months if once they get a little bit older. So we have Irish yew would be one choice, or we have lower bushier ones. Like this is, you can see the growth habit. What, I don't have a leader coming up. I've got more of that prostrate habit. This is one called Emerald Spreader. If I just wanted something maybe 2 to 3 feet tall that would spread out and eat up some ground, that's a great filler plant. And again, I can prune yew however I want to, so I could keep it almost as a hedge. We have other English yews that folks do that with. I can grow it in shade. I can grow it in part shade. As long as I water a little bit, I can do that out in full sun. I can really grow yews just about anywhere. So we're almost done here. Thuya, as we're getting towards the bottom there, that's our Western red cedars, our arborvitaes. There's a lot of choices for those, whether we're looking for that kind of living fence or a taller, stately tree like Western red cedar. If I look at something like green giant, this is a hybrid thuya. If I want quick growth, like 2 or 3 feet a year, it doesn't care about wet, so I can have that where it's a little more moist in the soil. And I want a big plant that I can block my neighbor with or give myself a little windbreak. Some of the larger thuyas are great choices, our Western red cedar and a lot of cultivars of them. So green giant might be one to think about. On the other side of that is something like this Grünkrugel. So if I look at that plant, that looks just like our 50-foot Western red cedars we have native here, but now I've taken that into a dwarf form. So this is a plant I could shear if I want, but if I let this grow, I'm just going to get maybe 3 feet tall, 3 feet wide, very manageable size in a lot of the gardens. Again, I like winter color. We've got a lot of green around here. I love the fact that this little guy and the cedars will turn that bronzy, kind of that shiny color over the winter, and then go right back to green come springtime. Kind of the different one in the thuyas would be, I call him Cousin It. So this is Dreadlocks Cousin It. It's a fun one. This is a little miniature Western red cedar called whipcord. You can see the real cordy foliage. That's got unbelievable texture. A lot of people use these as a little container specimen or in the garden. If I, again, let this grow, it's not a huge plant. This might get 3 or 4 feet tall, 3 or 4 feet wide as it gets old, but I've got a really fun little texture conifer if you like something a little bit different. That's whipcord. Okay. And the first one I brought out, Mr. Bowling Ball. There's an example of a easy to grow conifer, a little miniature arborvitae. I could take my hedge clippers out and just round this off and keep it to whatever size I really want to. I could let it get a little bigger if I want. I could certainly keep it a little bit smaller if I want. Just by one annual pruning will dictate the size. Last couple is Thuiopsis. I always bring one of these in for the people who have deer issues. So people call this Hebe cedar, staghorn cedar. I've heard it called deer cedar, all kinds of plants. It looks a lot like our native Western red cedars, but this is a bushier form in the Thuiopsis family that is different. It's a different plant that is absolutely deer proof. So a lot of the customers that purchase these maybe live up in the hills here a little ways and they're looking to keep the deer out of their vegetable garden. I plant some of these around as a perimeter or a small hedge. I've got a great plant that they will not chew on or browse and usually head the other direction towards hopefully the neighbor's garden, not yours. So Thuiopsis is someone to consider. It's a cool plant anyway, but the bonus of that is the deer proof. And last one on there, it's Suga, and that's our hemlocks. We've got lots of native Western hemlocks, mountain hemlocks, all kinds of cool hemlocks in Washington here. But there's some fun varieties. You don't have to have a 50, 60-foot tree. The native trees are much larger. we tend to get a lot of really cool weeping ones in, or dwarf bushy ones. Just to show you a couple that I like. This is a beautiful little weeping one. I have this in my garden too. This is a Canadian hemlock, super hardy, called Cole's Prostrate. So this is one you can see is short. It's going to arch over. This one will mound out and almost trail like a ground cover. I've seen other weeping hemlocks a little bit taller, but again, the weeping conifer is something that's up to you on how you would like it to be shaped long term. So I have this in my yard, pure shade, love shade on hemlock, and I have it growing over and dropping over a little short rockery back in my shade garden. We have a similar situation here at the nursery. We can show you an old one as well. It's just an easy to grow, excuse me, conifer. If we water a little bit, again with hemlock, likes a little water in the summer, and a little bit of shade, I think always is a little better than all day sun on hemlock. So Cole's Prostrate, if I want a little bit of color, you can see the white coming through on that. This is one called Moonfrost that Isley introduced. So if I want a bushy hemlock, maybe this gets 4 or 5 feet tall, 4 or 5 feet wide, but I like the white on green, the tips. This is one, again, I can prune hemlock. This is a random branch conifer. I can prune it if I want. And it makes a nice color. You know, if you got a dark shade garden, I have one of these in the back corner that doesn't get, you know, doesn't really get any direct sun, but it's nice to walk out all year, especially in the winter, and see that bright silvery white color with all the greens and the perennials dormant over the winter months. So, so an easy one to grow. It's Moonfrost. Okay. So I think that's the last one I saved for last, just to show you one last little cool plant. I don't know if everybody gets our Steve Smith, the owner here, the AKA the Whistling Gardener, put out a nice article. I talked him into on conifers this week. I'm glad he's doing conifers again. And he showed some gold things. He showed you Louis as a variety of eastern white pine that's big and yellow. He showed you the Karsten's winter gold, the golden mugo that I showed you a little earlier. The last one was Chief Joseph. So if I look at this little guy again, I can see the bright yellow color right now. This is a variety of lodgepole pine or shore pine if it's out towards the coast. But Chief Joseph is kind of one of those holy grail plants for conifer lovers. If you've had Chief, that looks just like any other pine all season long, just green, 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 and then wham, we get to the cold season here, and it turns a beautiful yellow color. It's got nice structure. It's not a super huge tree. You might see them up 10 or 12 feet as they get old. And something, again, I can prune the candles a little bit if I want to keep it even a little smaller, but certainly that traditionally is the one that's A, hardest for us to find, and B, we get maybe 30 trees a year, and once they're gone, they are gone, and I won't see them again until next November. So if you've been on the Grail search for a Chief Joseph, make sure you come down soon and do your shopping, because we do have some nice trees around right now, but they won't last long. It's usually one of the first things to sell out here in the fall. Okay, so that's an awful lot of conifers. I could probably do a 5-hour class and we could show you even more. There's a lot of things I didn't even mention, but I'll certainly give you an idea of some of the different, again, textures and forms and colors and growth habits. If you love conifers, do some looking online. I mean, Isley website is excellent. Our website's got a lot of cool plants on it. Take a look at those and look at your options. You know, we can special order you something, look for something to get you in for spring. If you find something that maybe we don't have around right now, we will still get a little bit more conifers in here before the holidays. And then, of course, we'll have Christmas trees, which is another conifer as well. So just wanted to mention to the class, like always, we have a discount for you folks that took the time, hopefully, to learn something today on Evergreens. So come down here starting today. You got all the way through Friday this next week. Just let our cashiers know you were at my class, and you're going to get 20% off all your conifers for the whole week. So on some of the really cool dwarf stuff, especially that might be a little more expensive, that's a great savings if you want to try some fun conifers for your own yard. Next class, I'm staying home next weekend for what would be trick-or-treating, but probably won't be for anybody, but hanging with my boys. So I'll be home next weekend. But the weekend of the 7th and the 8th, I'll be teaching class on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday will be about pruning. We'll have some slides, some PowerPoint to look through on proper pruning, starting here over the winter months, if you want to get a head start on kind of how to prune and when to prune. And then the 8th is another one of my favorite subjects is hellebores, the Lenten rose, winter blooming perennial extraordinaire. Love hellebores. I have a lot in my yard. And we'll be talking just specifically about different varieties and cultivars of hellebores on Sunday the 8th at 11 o'clock, okay? You'll see conifers, it kind of ties in. Two of the employees came in before class and said, man, it smells good in here, because it does. It smells a little like Christmas in here with all the evergreens. We start wreath making here at our place in just a couple of weeks. So mid-November, I'll be out doing a lot of tip pruning, and we will start wreath making. If you haven't done wreath making at Sunnyside, we'll have wreaths available online for sale this year, as well as parties to come down, restricted, of course, by COVID, 5 people in the room each time. But we'll have lots of families come down, work groups. It's been a tradition for a lot of people here in the Marysville area for going on 30 years. Our wreath making is second to none. I collect probably 30, 40 different types of evergreens, all conifers that you can have fun with, make your own kind of custom Christmas wreath. So I just wanted to mention that. So with all that information overload, we can do some questions if you're ready to go, Nicole.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. I know we're getting close to time, so we're going to do our best to get through these questions. If for some reason we don't get to your question, please reach out to us. Our email is sunnysidenursery@msn.com. And we're recording this and we'll post it up on our website, on our classes page on our website, either later today or tomorrow. So if you missed something or didn't catch a name or want to watch something again, you're welcome to go back and review the recording. Trevor, can you talk again about those fertilizers you mentioned in the beginning? Show us those and then tell us when's the best time to do that?
Well, you know, conifers again are all acid loving, so I would never have a problem if most every gardener's got rhododendron food. It covers 90% of the landscapes around here as an easy all-purpose fertilizer. That's a great choice for anything acid loving, including conifers, or sometimes I'll just have tree shrub food around that's good for just about everything as well. This one's got a little bit more nitrogen in it at 7%, but as long as we go with an organic granular, you really can't go wrong with either one of those. If you're going to feed, I would always try to do it coming out of winter. We don't ever want to feed this time of year. So say 1st of March, we will put down a dose. If you think you want a second dose, you might do it 1st of June for a little nice flush of summer growth. That's plenty.
Excellent. Do arborvitaes need water in winter?
If we're talking about our climate, I'll kind of smile and chuckle as I say, I do not think you're going to have to water your yard until like next May. How's that for honest truth? Yes, they need water, but with the amount of regular rain we get here in cooler temperatures, I would not worry about the winter at all, unless I'm underneath an eave or some kind of strange situation. In the summertime, absolutely. Not that you got to do it every day, but I've got a hedge of arborvitae. I'd probably give it a soaker hose treatment or a sprinkler treatment maybe once every week or two, depending on how the weather goes.
Can you give some tips on pruning like a weeping spruce, specifically a Norway spruce?
Yep. So, again, all conifers, I have the weepers here. The weeping Norway is the one I had out earlier. So if I look at this, again, if I don't want height, I could take my pruners and just cut this out right now. Now I'm not going to have any more height. I'm going to have that prostrate look. If it's maybe getting a little thick, I can go in and again, 1 year growth, 2 years growth, I can prune here, I could prune there, change the direction. But say yours is older and it's out a ways, I can't just cut the branch in half and leave a bare stub. So as long as I cut to where I've got side growth, maybe this one's a little easier. Let's say I wanted to slow this down, next spring, I'd come in and take out this piece right here, let it change direction and give me a little different texture. So yes, you can prune them. I would never do it this time of year. Again, borrowing a little piece for Christmas wreaths is one thing, but if you're going to get in and open it up or do some structure pruning, right coming out of winter is the ideal time.
Are there some general tips that in terms of which evergreens can be sheared and which ones need to be left alone, or some common ones?
Yeah, I mean, if you think of, again, I kind of threw out those fancy terms, random branch versus world. If you think of your Christmas tree, let's forget about that. It's a little thing we can't shear quite as easy. But if we look at arborvitae, hemlocks, juniper, cypresses, I mean, there's a lot of the evergreens we talked about today that are random branch that I could shear, keep tighter, keep lower. Again, maybe pick the right variety for the size that I want, so I don't have to do as much work. But yes, there's a huge range of those. Maybe to simplify it, if we stay away from pine, upright pine trees, spruces, true firs, and maybe sequoia would be probably the common ones. If I don't stay away from those, I probably can do any kind of shearing on most of the other conifers we mentioned today.
Excellent. Somebody mentioned they have a Hinoki cypress that the needles are turning yellow on the inside.
Yep.
Is that normal?
Yeah, so we talked about flagging. I showed the pine. All conifers, we think of evergreen. No plant keeps its leaves forever. So typical conifers are 3 years. So if I look at my plant and I have healthy growth this year, last year, then I get into that 3rd year and I start to see some of that yellowing and browning. That's probably natural flagging that's just dropping out the old growth. If I have brown out on the tips, then we got a problem. Bring me a sample or send some pictures and we try to diagnose it. But if it's down the center of the trunk and maybe out a little bit in those old branches away from the trunk, I'd be 99.9% positive you just got some flagging. Again, I mentioned OCD guy. I'm usually walking around my yard here about Thanksgiving with some gloves on and kind of pulling some of that out and letting it fall to the ground so I have the mulch. You don't have to be that crazy like I am about it if you don't want to, but that's the option, is we would just rake that out real easy or let Mother Nature eventually let it fall out of the tree as well.
I know as you went through the, different categories of conifers, you talked about which ones are good for pots, but can you maybe just do a few that are, your favorites in pots? And then how do you determine the size of pot you put it in and when it's too large for where it is?
Well, growing containers in conifers and containers is awesome. I've done it for years. You can always try something fun and move it into the yard as it gets older. Again, I would look at the tags for growth habits. Do I want something up and narrow? Do I want something low bushy? Do I want it weeping over my edge of my pot a little bit? I've seen all three, and that would be up to your personal taste. If I'm choosing something, that I want to live for a long time, I'm looking at that growth habit, and I'm trying to stay with things that may be miniature that grow an inch or two a year, or pretty good dwarfs that only grow 3 or 4 inches a year. If I buy, just takes this an example, I buy this really cool Korean fir, yes, I could get a massive pot and grow in it for years, but if I'm typically buying a, 2 foot by 2 foot pot or so, I might get 5 or 6 years out of this before I got to transplant it in my yard or get a larger container. If I buy something that maybe doesn't mind being a little more root bound or grows slower, like I showed the yews earlier, love this for a vertical accent, and I've got room to pop in some fillers and spillers and have a really cool container. I've had these in, big black urns on my patio. This will be going on year 12. And this is the first year I'm like, I don't know, maybe I want to try something different. I may take those out this winter, transplant them in my yard, and then buy some new ones to a different plant to pop in the pots. But anything, to me, it's always maybe with conifer, with my taste, I'm trying to look for something that's got, a vertical presence or accent to use kind of for my thriller. Then I can pop perennials, heucheras, hellebores, fun stuff around it as filler and still add some annual color every year to the different containers. So the yew there, what else I have? The cephalotaxis. If you like a little thicker needle, that's a fun plant to pop in pots. The Japanese plum yew, that's a narrow one. You can really grow just about anything in the pot, but obviously I'm going to try to talk you into something that just doesn't get quite as big long term, and then pick the color you like as well.
Are all yews slow growers, even the spreaders?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know about not the slowest growers, but they're pretty slow. I mean, on a good year, you probably get 4 or 6 inches out of most ewes in the ground, in a container, probably even just a little less. And again, I like you because I think they're versatile, and you get some color choices with yellows, different shades of green, and they're very prunable. I mean, it's got to be one of the easiest conifers. I could shear it into a hedge if I wanted to, let it grow low and ground, kind of pick whatever I want to do with them.
How come we aren't able to grow those big coastal redwoods out here?
Well, I shouldn't say you can't. We've got a neighbor here from the nursery. That's one of the things we have that's really cool for our Christmas wreaths, that has one, and he's had it since the 60s. The lightning has taken the top out of it 5 times over the years, and it doesn't look like what you see down in Northern California at the redwood forest. It's a hardiness thing, and I don't want to get into a global warming discussion and everything else that's going on Earth, but I bet you're pretty safe if you live down in town here towards the water and you've got room. You could probably grow it forever. If I live up in the hills here, probably not quite hardy enough. Coast redwoods down there at that zone 7, sometimes zone 8 on different cultivars. So it's not necessarily the winter temperature, but it's probably not the easiest thing as far as if we do get a cold winter.
We've got somebody who has a drain field close to their house, and they're wondering if they're okay putting conifers, specifically the minis and the dwarfs, about 10 feet away from a drain field.
Then you'd be fine, especially mini and dwarf, and look for shallow rooted things. I mean, if you've got sun and you like, one of my favorite groups, I mentioned the Hinoki cypresses. You can get a lot of cool varieties of Hinoki cypress. I don't think would interfere ever with your drain field, and they don't root so far into the soil, nice and high and dry, and they would not be ones you would need to water a whole bunch either. So I'd look, Hinoki cypress would be one of my first choices, or miniature varieties of the other plants we've shown.
You mentioned some deer-proof or deer-resistant varieties. Can you give us just a few of those again as a brief synopsis?
Well, for deer, they will not touch pine. They will not touch spruce. Those are 2, again, bush, weeping, tall, doesn't matter, whatever your taste is. I brought up that one in particular, Thuiopsis, because I think it's a pretty cool looking conifer, a little cedary look to it. But this they would call staghorn cedar, and this is the deer proof, more of a shrub version. But pines, spruces, if you look, always add Pacific Northwest to it or Seattle to it, but get on Google and type in Seattle deer resistant plants, and you're going to come up with a pretty decent list of some things that they avoid browsing on. Off the top of my head, those are a few of the best conifer choices.
Excellent. We're going to do 2 last questions. One being, can you move an evergreen right now?
Yeah, I thought about bringing that up, but no, I wouldn't do it quite yet. Transplanting season to me is dormant. Yes, we have frost coming here the next couple nights. If you can wait till the holidays, I typically try to tell people, wait till those things are dormant for the winter. So maybe later November, you've probably got all the way up to the first part of March or so as your time frame. And make sure you take enough soil. Conifer is not going to like, if I've got a 4 foot across plant and I try to dig a little 2 foot root ball and move it, you're probably going to lose it. And it's going to take you about 5-6 months to figure that out as it goes browner and browner. So try to take all the earth you can, preferably to the drip line of the plant, as we call it, and you'll have a little easier transplant.
Lastly, you talked a little bit about pruning a weeping conifer, but can you talk just briefly about training a weeping conifer?
Oh, you could train. I mean, that's kind of fun. We'll have some more here when they start digging, now that we're getting some rain. We'll have blue Atlas cedar in, or the Norway spruce was a great example. I mean, I could do whatever I want to that. I've seen them, we call it the dinosaur, trained out into an arm. I've seen them trailed along railings, looking like living railings with all the growth hanging down. If I stake, use stretch tie, don't use metal or anything hard to tie them. You might forget they're there and they'll cut the bark down the road. But if I take a stake or any kind of structure, I mean, I could train that out into any kind of shape that I want. The weeping things will always be a little bit freeform if you let them go, which is cool. but if you've got a particular shape in mind, train it however you like to. I can get some small bamboo stakes, stake leaders, branches out, and kind of have a really fun shape with them.
Excellent. Thanks so much for all the great information, and hopefully we'll see everybody again 2 weekends from now for Trevor's next classes.
Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the sun today.